This video is a part of a free chapter from my new course, The Blendinator. Click the links in the description to learn more. Okay, so this is what we have so far. And we've gotten to this point by only projecting one image from our camera, which is this one, and we built our geometry around this image, which we put into fSpy to calculate the X, Y, and Z axes to figure out the camera focal length and rotation, orientation, and position. But if you don't have a 360-degree camera, then when you try to capture your surroundings, you're going to probably need multiple images. So in this video, I want to show you several ways that you can use multiple images in fSpy to import into Blender to project onto a single object. So we've already got our first one. So let's open up fSpy and drag in the second one. And we can uncheck dim image here. Okay, so if you're going to be taking several different images of the same thing, just at different angles, one of the things you want to try to accomplish, which is not always possible, but try to accomplish, is have the same origin point in both images. So remember our first image, our origin point was right here. Now in the second image, that same point is going to be right here. So we can see it in both images. Later on, I'll show you what you can do if you can't see the same origin point, but for now we can. So we need to adjust the orientation here. So let's drag our lines like we know how to do. Remember, the length of the box is the x-axis and the width is the y-axis. Okay, so now we can place this. And remember, so our z-axis is pointing down, so we need to change either the x or the y. So can you guess which one we need to change? So remember, if we're looking at the front of our box, this is left and right, which means that this way is going to be positive. So we are pointing towards positive x, so this is just fine. But negative x is this way, pointing away from the front of our face. Pointing towards the front of our face is the positive y, so we need to flip that. So let's just flip it from positive to negative here, and then now it flips to the correct orientation here. Then we can drag this down to our origin point that we know. And I already see that we have an issue with the Z going up. It's not following this. Now that could very well be because our box isn't all that straight right here. But let's just check this here with this box, and we can just kind of move the corners around like this. Even still, I think it's not quite lining up. Okay, so in this situation, I could just come in here and keep tweaking these until we get the desired result, but I'm going to introduce you to another tool, and that is the third vanishing point. Now you may be wondering how you get there because we only have two to choose from up here from our vanishing points, and we only have two here. Well, the third one is kind of hidden. It's under this principal point, and under the drop down, we can say from third vanishing point, and then it gives us our z-axis that we can line up just like the other ones. And now when we look at our measurements, that should line up just fine, both in the back and on the sides and on the top. This looks just like it should. Now I do want to mention that when you're doing this for one object like this is pretty easy. But if you have multiple objects in your scene, you should probably make sure that everything in the background, along the edges of the image and in the corners and stuff, make sure everything lines up. You may have to change some of these lines in order to make stuff line up, and it's not going to be perfect. And sometimes you're just going to have to compromise with some things. It just all depends on your camera and your lens distortion and all of that. Okay, that looks good. The last thing we need to do is our reference distance. So we're going to do along the y-axis again. And remember, we've got here and here for the width. And the width is 2 inches. So we type 2 and then enter. We can't tab here, just remember that. And then inches. And now we can save this as, and in our fSpy folder, I'm just going to call this 2 for our image 2. So back in Blender, let's go ahead and save our work, and then we can import our fSpy number 2. And you can see if we go into wireframe, look at that. Let's also bring our opacity all the way up. We have almost lined everything up just like we want. Looks like we need to tweak it just a little bit, but right off the bat, it looks pretty good. Now this time, we're not going to tweak the geometry, so we don't want to come in here and start moving faces and stuff because we've already lined it up with the other camera, which, by the way, we can switch back and forth between the two cameras with this green camera button. If for some reason you can't see it, because it's like this, just open it up and then you'll be able to see it down here. But if you have this open far enough, you can see it just over here. So we can switch back and forth by clicking that, and you can see that switching in our viewport. Now, our geometry is based on this image, so we don't want to change it, because if we change it here, then it's going to be off in this view. So instead, what we have to do, let's go back and make this one our active camera, and make sure this camera is selected. And we want to scale and rotate just a tiny bit, but we want to do it based on the 3D origin. So make sure the 3D cursor is in the 3D origin, cursor to world origin. If you can't see the cursor, just make sure you have 3D cursor enabled. And then change our pivot point to the 3D cursor so that if I come out here, you can see if I start to rotate, it's rotating around the 3D cursor. Same thing with scaling and all of that stuff. Let's also come to our camera properties down to viewport display, change this to 4 as well so that it matches. Okay, and now if I press S to scale, you can see we're scaling the camera, but you can see the wireframe looks like it's getting bigger or smaller, and that's just because the camera itself is getting closer or further away from the object. So what we can do is look at that and scale that. And I'm looking back here to kind of line that up. Now it looks like it's also kind of off in location space, so we can grab that on the Y, and I can hold down Shift to go a little bit slower and just pull that over just a little bit, and that then lines everything up really nicely. Let's go to solid mode, and then we can go to X-ray, and then maybe pull that down a little bit just so that you can see that. And if we switch back and forth, you can see that now we have two images that line up directly with our one object ready for projection. So speaking of projection, let's come out here and make sure that that works. So let's go to Material Preview. And right now it is, I believe we're still using the bake. Let's go to the material and see what we're using. Yes, so we're using matte bake 2. So we just need to go back to matte projection. And there we have our projection. And of course, we don't have any modifiers, so we're going to have to add those modifiers back. If you press Control 3, that brings our subdivision to levels 3 automatically. I wish it would also make it 3 here. I don't know why it doesn't. But anyway, simple. And then UV project. We're going to do all the same things, except we need to add another UV map because mod is for the other camera. So let's go and add another UV map. I'm going to just select mod because we want to duplicate that one. It doesn't really matter, but duplicate that. And then underscore, we'll just say mod 2 is fine. And then we can come up here and let's just put this one at mod 1920 by 1080. This will be for our camera 1, our 1 fSpy. And then what we can do is take this and then duplicate it and then choose mod 2, and everything is the same except for we need to change the cameras. But we're not going to be able to see both of them at the same time, so we need to choose which one we want to see. And nothing is changing right now either because we have our UV map selected here. So if we look at this, we have our map mod on. This, by the way, corresponds to our nodes, so that's what this is. So if I go to materials and you see down here UV map and map mod, that's the same thing here. So if I click X here, it will delete it from here as well. I'm just going to actually delete this altogether and then come over to layout, and Let's see, which one do we see as the projection? I say not that one and not that one still. So we need to come to our object and our data, and we need to choose which one of these we want as the active render. Right now it's on flat, so we need to choose mod 2 to make sure that that is. Okay, so this is the right projection, but the wrong image. And that is because our material is using the 1 fSpy image, and we need the 2 fSpy image. So we just select 2, and ta-da! Now we have projection 2. And what we should have done actually, let's go to the baking and select our object. We should have made a duplicate of this, so we'll do that now. So let's duplicate that, make this a fake user. This will be project 2, just to be consistent here. And then we'll drag this out, add a UV map back in, and use our mod 2, just so that we can be consistent and switch back and forth between project 1 and project 2. So we need to change this back to 1 for just the project 1, add in our UV map, our regular mod. There. Okay, great. So now when we come to our material, up here, we either use project 1, which is this camera, or we use project 2, which is this camera. Now we have this shining the texture on the back side so that we can see that. And also on the side here, we still don't have this side or the bottom. It's still bleeding through just like the first camera. And of course on the back side here as well. So now what we need to do is combine the two projections together, and we'll do that in the next video. But before we move on to that, I want to show you a couple more tricks. So let's say you're taking a few images, and the second image you add, you notice you cannot see the original origin point, which is on the other side of the box. So what do we do in this situation? Well, let's go ahead and line everything up again. I'm also going to introduce another tool here that you can use, which is rectangular mode. Now, you don't have to use rectangular mode for the occluded origin point. It's just something that I'm randomly deciding to show you. So feel free to line all of these up if you want, or use the rectangle mode. This is just to line up the initial orientation. So I'm also going to change this back to default for now, and then we're going to also change this back to image midpoint, which is the default for that. Okay, and so we just line these up here. I'm going to line it up with the big back face over here. So we'll do this. And again, these corners are a little bit difficult to see what's actually straight up and down, but we are going to do the best we can with what we got. Okay, let's check to see if that lines up. That looks good. That looks good. Back corner over there, this corner up here, this down here. Yep, that all looks pretty good. Okay, so where would you put it? Well, technically, if I was doing this in real life, I would probably put it as close as possible to the one we had before, which would be right here. But just for demonstration purposes, so you can see the difference, I'm going to put it all the way on the opposite corner right over here. But you notice something here, that our axes are wrong. You can see the z-axis is wrong here, and that is because number 2 up here is using the y-axis. And we need this to actually use the z-axis. So z or negative z, we'll see which one is the correct one. Well, not that one, because the z is going down, so we need that to go up, so just flip it. And there we go. Perfect. Now we need to get our measurements back. So let's bring that back on along the Y. And we know our measurement from here to here is 2 inches. So there we go. We've got that 2 inches. And now we can go ahead and save it. I'm going to save this one as 2B because it is the alternative version, 2B or not to be. Come on, you were waiting for it. Okay, so back in Blender, I'm just going to hide this one here. We don't need that one right now because we're going to use the projection from the other angle. So let's bring in, import our fSpy, our 2B. Okay, so now let's go into our wireframe and let's bring the opacity up. And we actually did something wrong. because we are on the same side as this one, and we need to be on the opposite side. So going back here, what did we do wrong? Okay, so the y-axis is pointing the wrong direction, and the x-axis is pointing the wrong direction. This direction here is the positive y, so we need to flip that around, and the same thing, we need to flip that around. So let's try negative x and see what that does. Okay, so that fixed it there. Now we have the y going over here. We still have it showing here because that's our reference distance, but now it's oriented the proper way. So come up to File, and then we just save it, and then it will overwrite it, and we'll re-import it. And now it's opposite. So now you can see it's on this side. Let's bring that size down. I hate this. Okay, there we go. Matches that. But it's not quite. And the reason it's not quite lined up, in fact, it looks like it's way off, is because of the origin point. Remember, we had to move that in fSpy. So how do we fix this in Blender? First thing we want to do is add in an empty sphere. You can add in whatever empty you want. I think sphere is the easiest. I'm going to scale it down just a tad here. And then I'm going to select the camera and then shift select the empty. Make sure both of them are selected and the empty is active. Control P to parent, keep transform. So now if I take this and I move that, the camera moves with it. Okay, so now we want to snap this to where we had the origin in our second image, which was on this corner. So I'm going to change the snap to vertex and then G to grab, and then press and hold Control while I'm close to this vertex, and then left click to set that down. And now let's go into our camera view. Aha, now we are just about lined up here. Of course, we have to adjust it a little bit here. But since this is already parented to this empty, we can actually use the empty to control the camera. And if we're going to do it that way, we don't want it to be rotating around the 3D cursor. So let's change the pivot point to median point and make sure the empty is selected, not the camera. And now we can S to scale, and it's going to scale the camera along with it because it's still parented. So we can either S to scale, we can also R to rotate on the Z slightly. Again, we can G to grab and choose an axis, Y or X or Z, so things like that. But that looks pretty good from here. So now we just need to come back out here, go into material preview mode again, and now we just need to come to the object modifiers and change our UV map mod 2 from 2 to 2B. I'm saying 2 too many times. Okay, but we also have to change our surface material in our project 2. We're using 2. We also need to change this to 2B. And there we go. So now this camera is controlling the projection on this side. And this is a huge advantage for us because now we have 3 faces on this side using this camera, and on the opposite side we have 3 other faces. Well, the top face is actually shared, but we have these other 2 faces over here using this camera. Well, it's not using it currently, and we'll get to that in the next video, but this gives you the concept of what we're trying to do. So to demonstrate this, I've created another couple of images. I've got some awesome DVDs here. By the way, I don't care what you say, Firefly is the all-time best television show ever. No argument. Case closed. Anyway, as you can see, I can actually fit all 3 of these in a single image, but what I wanted to do is demonstrate a technique that you can do if your camera is only pivoting. So for example, let's just say my shot looks like this, and I have these 2 in full view, but I have this one cut off. Well, what I can do with my camera is just pivot it on a single axis just to capture the rest of it over here. So I take these 2 images and then I choose which one I want to put into fSpy, which I chose this one. And then I lined everything up like this. And something I did just a little differently this time was use the Z-axis for the measurement. So this DVD collection is 8 inches tall. I then imported it into Blender and started building out these DVD boxes. So the trick is we're going to try to recreate the second camera manually in Blender without going back into fSpy. Now again, this is only going to be possible if your camera shots are taken all in the same spot with as close to a single pivot point as possible. So essentially, only if your camera is rotating like this when you take the picture, or rotating up and down like this. And in order to achieve that, especially if you're using a cell phone, what you want to do is find out where your camera is. So if you have the back of the phone facing you, it's usually either in the top left corner or directly in the top middle. So figure out where your back-facing camera is, and then when you go to take a picture, put your finger on the underside of your phone, right underneath where the camera is. And when you take your next shots, just use your finger as the pivot point, whether that is left to right or up and down. You may have to move your finger depending on whether you're going up and down or left and right. But that will help maintain a tight pivot point, which is what we want. Okay, so let's come back in here. And like I said, instead of going back into fSpy, what we're going to do is just select our camera, Shift D to duplicate it, and then make sure that that's the active one. We want to switch to that. And then we want to switch our image. So we need to go find our image because we don't have it uploaded here. So open, go grab your second shot. And now we can't really see our wireframe that easily. So we can do a couple things. Let's just go to solid shaded mode here. And I've also put X-ray on here, so you can kind of adjust that as you see fit. And this is the cool thing. If we come up here to view, navigation, and walk navigation, we can just rotate our camera as if we were in the camera holding it and moving it around from that pivot point. I'm going to right click to cancel that because something easier, especially if you do this on a regular basis, is if you right click, you can add to quick favorites. Now I already have it there, but if you don't, just click that and then it will add it to your quick favorites and you can access it by pressing Q and then choose walk navigation, and then you can straight away start moving this. And so now we just act just like we did when we took the pictures in the real world. We just pivoted over here. So I'm pivoting it to where the firefly is in the correct position here. And more so, I'm looking at the origin point because I'm going to adjust it and tweak it from there. So that is pretty good right there. And now we do have to tweak this a little bit here. I'm going to turn wireframe on out here so we can also see that a little bit better. Okay, with the camera still selected, I can come here to 3D cursor because we want to make sure we adjust the camera according to the world origin. Okay, and then we can do that. We can do all of the things that we've been doing. We can rotate, we can scale. I can also grab on the X and move that over maybe a little tiny smidgen and scale that back down. And it's not going to be perfect, but this time we can't actually go back into fSpy to tweak things. We just have to tweak everything here in Blender. So if this doesn't work, which sometimes it might not, then you would actually have to go back into fSpy and make one for the second image. But I think we can get away with it here enough. We can also rotate this, I think, on the y-axis a little bit. Oh, that's too much. If you rotate or scale or anything, if your mouse cursor is too close to the point of origin when you press R, it's going to be really sensitive. So make sure your mouse cursor is a little bit further away when you press R, and then you have a little bit more control. Okay, so there we go. That's a little bit better because I'm looking at this being perpendicular to going up and down. Okay, so now we might have to G. I'm going to press G and then Shift Z. So we exclude the Z axis. We just kind of slide that on the ground. I'm going to press and hold Shift as well. I realize my screencast keys aren't showing, and I apologize for that. That is just the nature of the screencast keys. They show up when they want. And actually, we probably might want to rotate that. Sometimes it's hard to tell if I need to rotate it on the y-axis or the z-axis. And this is going to be the hardest thing to get used to try to figure out. What looks right from one perspective might actually be in the real world completely wrong. And you can already see that if I line one of these up, the other one doesn't line up very well. I think that is maybe the best we're going to do now. And so just know that it's not going to be 100%, but this is something that might save you some time so you don't have to jump back and forth between fSpy for every single picture. And now what we can do is we can take this box, Shift D to duplicate, Shift Z to exclude the Z axis, and we want to put the bottom left corner right over there because that's our pivot point. R to rotate on the Z. Oh, and then we want to make sure this is on median point again. RZ, and there we go. Grab and pull that down and take the back face. And what we can do, since we're not actually lined up on the global axis, the best way to move faces is by going into normal mode. So normal mode, if we press G and then Z, it'll go back and forth on its normal, which is the direction that it's facing. So I'll select this one here on the side, G, and then I can middle mouse also, and it does the same thing as long as Blender knows what my mouse is trying to do. We'll take the front also, hold that out. Let's go just back into wireframe. It's a little bit easier to see that. And again, it doesn't look like it's entirely perfect, but it's good enough. And this is going to allow us to do more projection just by importing one fSpy camera and then duplicating that for all of the others. And we could keep going as long as we stay in the relatively the same spot. We can just start rotating around and taking those pictures and duplicating the cameras here in Blender to match everything as we build out our world. And this is going to help us for when we build my living room. So we can take a corner of my living room and then stand in the opposite corner and then rotate around, taking a picture from right to left or left to right, and then up and down. And just from standing on one corner of the room, we can capture the whole other corner and then do the opposite, go on the opposite corner and do the same thing. Very similar to what we are achieving here on opposite corners here, except for going inwards. Okay, but now the time has come to head to the next video where we will talk about how to use both of these projections on a single object so that the back will represent this projection and the front will represent this projection. So when you're ready, head on over to the next one.